For anyone invested in Ukraine's struggle for its survival, the last few months have been nothing short of exhausting. Well, I can't speak for you watching this video, but for us here in Kyiv, I can't find a better word. In the space of a month, we went from this...
I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today.
...to this...
We're going to have a meeting with Russia. There'll be some swapping of territories.
...to this...
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
...to this...
I think that President Putin wants to find an answer too.
...to this...
But I thought it was a nice picture of him. Okay of me, but nice of him.
It has been a true emotional roller coaster. A flurry of movement in the geopolitical arena, grand summits, new buzzwords, a new suit, statements right and left, while on the front line, the battles have been as intense as ever. But as we take a second to exhale, what has actually changed? Where can we draw the line between progress and posturing, between consensus and circus? My name is Farrell, a reporter here at the Kyiv Independent, and in this video, we will make sense of what has come to pass and try to understand what comes next. To start, we have to rewind the clock a bit.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th President of the United States.
At the beginning of this year, with the inauguration of US President Donald Trump just over the horizon, we made a video about how Russia's war against Ukraine could potentially end with new leadership in the White House. Back then, I argued that to cut through the vague language infesting the information space about a potential peace deal, any serious scenario about how the war could end must first start with a credible answer to the question, why should Russia stop? Beyond that, everything would depend on the balance of power between Kyiv and Moscow. Something would be decided in two places, on the front line and on the international stage. Looming over both these battlegrounds was a great unknown, that of President Trump's final decision. Whether to back Kyiv, pressure Moscow and achieve peace through strength, or to step away, abandon Ukraine and force Kyiv to choose between capitulation now or defeat later. It was never going to be an easy choice for the man that had promised to end the war in 24 hours. And now, over half a year later, Trump still hasn't decided. And here's the key point. Everything that we have seen since the inauguration, from energy truces to minerals deals, from Istanbul to Alaska, has been a struggle for that final decision. Let's rewind to February, where things got off to a bad start for Ukraine. A start so bad that it is physically painful to rewatch. Yes, I'm talking about the Oval Office.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Coming to Washington unprepared for diplomacy Trump style and scolded by Vice President J.D. Vance on live TV, President Zelensky soon saw himself staring down the barrel of disaster as Washington cut off intelligence and military aid to Kyiv, even that which was already paid for under the Biden administration. Both before and after the meeting, the very basic truths of Russia's war were brought under question by Trump and his team, who struggled to even acknowledge which country started it. In that moment, it looked like the decision was made, and in the worst possible way, with some commentators even speculating that the US might soon secretly start providing intelligence to Russia. Watching the meltdown from across the Atlantic, Ukraine's European partners scrambled into reaction, presenting a united front in support of Ukrainian sovereignty and forming a so-called coalition of the willing, although it remained very unclear what it was that they were really willing and ready to do. Meanwhile, Kyiv needed to bounce back fast, and bounce back it did. After talks held with Foreign Secretary Marco Rubio, Ukraine and the US presented a joint call for an unconditional 30-day ceasefire on land, air, and sea. This was a crucial step. Of course, such a ceasefire would be nowhere near what was needed to achieve a secure, sustainable peace for Ukraine. But in the short term, it achieved much more, striking home the message that Ukraine was the party ready for peace here, and that the main barrier to stopping the killing was Russia. To sweeten the deal, some clever Ukrainian negotiation reached a landmark minerals agreement with the US, turning what was initially an exploitative insult into a workable deal that directly tied Ukraine's survival to a big material win for Trump. The reaction from Moscow was cold and careful. Rejecting a ceasefire, Russian officials all the way up to President Vladimir Putin pushed the need to reach a final peace agreement that addresses the root causes of the war, which, beyond a thin veil of propaganda narrative, really refer to a strong, independent, democratic Ukraine existing at all. Still, Russia made a minimum effort to appear interested in peace, proposing limited truces on Black Sea operations and strikes against energy infrastructure, as well as a laughable truce over Easter that never happened. Then, with Trump's enthusiastic encouragement, came the Istanbul peace talks, where the Russian delegation, led by low-level bureaucrats, was sent to repeat Moscow's maximalist position. Moscow's so-called peace memorandum in Istanbul was basically a laundry list of demands that one would make after already winning a war, handing over all 4 Ukrainian regions claimed by Russia, abandoning of NATO membership ambitions, limits on Ukraine's military size, giving Russian language a special status, and so on. With Russia not interested in stopping and Ukraine not interested in surrendering, nothing was achieved beyond prisoner exchanges. But more importantly, it started to look like the months of hard work by Kyiv and the Europeans were starting to move Trump in the right direction. Before I continue, I want to make a quick point. Everything we do here, from these explainers to our frontline field reports to our war crimes investigations, is made possible by you, our readers and viewers. If you like what we do and are ready to help us get bigger and better in what we do, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community by clicking the link below. Thank you. The president's rhetoric started to turn against Russia, best seen in all caps Truth Social posts shouting, "Vladimir, stop!" One unexpected comment revealed that an important role could have even been played by First Lady Melania Trump.
I go home, I tell the First Lady, and I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, "Oh, really? Another city was just hit."
By mid-July, Trump set out a 50-day deadline for Russia to stop the war or face consequences, which was soon shortened to 10 or 12 days. As the deadline approached, in what looked like an attempt to pressure Russia, the president slapped extra tariffs on India, citing the country's imports of Russian oil as the main reason. It looked like the home stretch for Ukraine, that Trump was finally seeing the light. And after months of stalling, smug confidence, Russia looked worried that they might finally face the heat for snubbing Washington's peace efforts. So what did Putin do? He made an offer too juicy for Trump to refuse. A blockbuster reality TV show episode where Trump was the main character. A personal meeting of 2 strong men to decide the fate of the world and maybe finally give Trump his big win. Together with the offer to meet, Moscow also added their own sweetener, lessening their demands to only Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, rather than all 4 oblasts that Russia had claimed back in September 2022. If Ukraine would only do that, withdraw from the remainder of Donbass, then, Moscow told Trump, he could have his peace, he could have his Nobel Prize. But let's pause for a second. This is, of course, a completely unacceptable demand for Ukraine, and we need to make sure we understand why. First of all, it's impossible, according to Ukraine's constitution, to divide Ukrainian territory or hand it over to another state. Militarily, it would also hand over a lot of land that Russia would otherwise require years and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of losses to capture by force. Speaking of losses, the Ukrainian military, who have fought tooth and nail and lost some of their best people in the battles for Donetsk Oblast, are unlikely to simply withdraw from it without a fight. But most importantly, handing over new territory means giving up people, hundreds of thousands, into Russian occupation, a police state with its torture of civilians, militarization of society, and deportation of children. Moscow's special sabotage operation worked like a charm. Suddenly, all the pressure from Washington for a ceasefire was gone, and Trump was suddenly talking about swapping land, calling Ukraine unreasonable for not considering handing over new territory into Russian occupation. Then came Alaska itself, symbolic in its proximity to Russia and its separation from the country whose fate the two men seemed to be planning to decide. It was no accident that Moscow chose Alaska. Its history, having been sold by the Russian Empire to the United States in the 19th century, gave it the perfect symbolic resonance for this new deal. A reminder that land could be traded, that borders could be moved, and that great men could decide the destiny of nations with a signature and a handshake. For Moscow, it was the perfect trap, shifting the conversation in Washington from supporting Ukraine's fight for survival to pressuring Kyiv to accept the unacceptable. Unsurprisingly, the meeting itself brought no peace, no new conclusions, barely anything at all, just plenty of sickening optics for the US and the free world, no more so than when US soldiers knelt down to lay out the red carpet for the arrival of a fascist war criminal. Inconclusive as Alaska was, the damage was done. The months of hard work to focus Trump on pressing Russia for a ceasefire was for naught, and now it once again seemed like Ukraine who wasn't making enough concessions. Scrambling to react once more, Zelensky and the Europeans arrived in Washington a few days later for an unprecedented gathering of world leaders within the White House walls. Compared to the last time Zelensky sat in the same spot in the Oval Office, there were laughs, there was flattery, there was a suit, and there was no disaster. Meanwhile, taking turns to praise Trump for his bold efforts for peace, European leaders chose to steer mostly clear of the topic of a ceasefire, instead talking about a future Putin-Zelensky meeting and hopes for progress on security guarantees for Ukraine. But stop, wait a second. What security guarantees? We haven't heard that term in a while, and that's no coincidence. Let's get back to basics, again, just for a second. For the war to end, Russia needs to stop, and for peace to hold, Russia needs to be deterred from starting again. We haven't heard much about security guarantees lately because Ukraine has chosen to focus on the stopping Russia part, on a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Before that pivot, Ukraine and its strongest partners were very clear. Only NATO membership and Article 5 protection would be an adequate security guarantee. But Trump has said repeatedly that NATO membership is not on the table. The presence of European boots on the ground to enforce a peace agreement has also been floated, particularly by the members of the Coalition of the Willing. But this idea ignores the first part, for Russia to stop. And Moscow has said many times that it will not accept a peace agreement that includes European forces in Ukraine. But anything else, anything that's not that kind of hard deterrence, is simply a piece of paper. Ukraine has fresh memories of how useless such pieces of paper are, whether it's the UN Charter or the Budapest Memorandum, in stopping Russian aggression. So, after the latest two big acts of theater, first in Alaska, then in Washington, what has really changed? Well, Russia is now once again off the hook, with no pressure for a ceasefire, free to pursue its war. What will come next? Well, most likely, the merry-go-round will continue. We'll see more theater, more circus as the battle for Trump's final decision continues. Meanwhile, the real battles on the front line will rage onward. The daily killings of Ukrainian civilians will not pause. And in Trump land, we'll be back to vague flip-flops and claims that he'll see in about 2 weeks. Going forward, it's worth remembering once again the basic frame in which these peace talks happen. To end Russia's war in Ukraine, it's Moscow that must stop. And if the only condition is capitulation, Kyiv retains the right to keep fighting. And, as long as the military stands, the ability to do so too. On the back of the summits in Alaska and Washington, suddenly foreign journalists are swarming into Ukraine again, trying to get the hot take of how we see it here on the ground, while this country's fate is decided somewhere else. Spoiler alert, most of the time, in the fourth year of Russia's full-scale war, there are very few foreign journalists here actually finding out what's going on the ground. But you can count on us, the Kyiv Independent, whose home is Ukraine, is Kyiv, to always be here, to always be on the ground, bringing you the reality of Russia's war. To help us do this, to support Ukrainian independent journalism, please consider becoming a member of our Kyiv Independent community by clicking on the link in the description. Thank you.